Howdys and salutations, y'all. Hope you're having a good one so far. We're going to pick up where we left off, but first off, just a little bit of a recap. Obviously I'm doing a little better energy-wise than yesterday. Turns out getting to sleep on time does wonders, don't it? No matter how important the stinking laundry might be. Although, if the laundry happens to be your sheets, it makes the whole getting to bed thing just a hair more complicated. But even so. Doing better today. I'll admit I'm still not quite 100%, but Overall, good. I don't think my tiredness is like sleepy tired now. It's that I just had to sift through a bunch of like emails and junk, and it's like just stinking boring. Like, it's fine for work. Work, it's interesting and productive, and we're doing things. But all the personal emails where it's just spam, spam, junk, garbage, it's like, okay. It's like, work is work time, and it's productive. Home, these emails are not productive, and also, it's my home time. Leave me alone, stinking garbo emails. But yeah. I need to go through and, like, partly unsubscribe from mailing lists, partly start sending more stuff to junk mail automatically, just to clean that up. It's getting to the point where I ought to do that. Also, I don't know about y'all, but I feel like text message spam is way up, or at least I ended up on somebody's stinking list. So obnoxious when that happens. Just like, well, somehow someone either looked up or just randomly selected your number from all the numbers out there, and now you get to deal with the garbage they send your way on a multiple times a day basis. Making sure we're still on 686868 for this gray, because that's a nice gray. Then actually going onto the pencil instead of our fun little pen. Yeah. Let's see. This mechanical pencil doesn't behave exactly the way I'd expect a mechanical pencil to, but it's not bad. Mainly because, well, I value tilt a lot in my mechanical pencils when I'm actually using them. But also, mechanical pencils, and also real ones, but I have finer control over it with mechanical. You can really, like, adjust the sharpness of your tip to get a sharp point or, like, a blunt, like, color in point. That's part of what I was trying to mimic with this one. Is, like, this is how I feel with mechanical pencils. Is you've got the really nice fine point, or when you get it worn down on the edge, you can get, like, a wider point. Now, this is probably a little exaggerated, but on a small enough scale, it's reasonable. And not unlike, and then obviously darkness also with pressure. Uh-oh. What layer is that on? Whoa! Ah, haha, let's just remove all the vector lines. Or were those the eraser lines? Oh, because it's a soft erase, so like it's not actually getting rid of the underlying lines. Okay, I should have used the vector eraser for the vectors. That makes sense. Well, learn one new thing every day. Now, how's about we actually try to make this wing happen? Not using the soft eraser. Cool. We're just tossing that line. We don't need it no more. You done good, line. Appreciate you, but your work here is done, mate. Okay. So just keeping in mind that this section is truthfully not the most important. Like, it's important that it has detail. It's not critically essential that the detail is actually right. Like, you know, obviously, I'd like it to be, or at least I'd like it to look reasonable for whatever it happens to be. Okay, yeah, let's get that off of the contour. I mean, I can't seem to get this intersection away from it without reworking a little bit, which admittedly can be done. It's a little janky. Yeah, that'll work. As we get down here, it's more aimed with, like, the point being higher up, with a few variants down here, and then back up to high point down there. Let's see, let's just do a little cleanup there. Okay. That means that's probably on under helm, isn't it? Or helm base. Helm base, yeah, obviously. There we go. Now it's clearer that this is in front of it and not actually intersecting with that bit in the back there. Okay, got some. Not the funny thing about trying to look at this in silhouette, which is part of what was throwing me off when I was doing it before, but yesterday I was able to focus so hard on like just the silhouette that I didn't cause an issue. But I was trying to eyeball it. I was like, the little wing segments aren't actually getting significantly bigger or bigger at all as you go up, but their impact on the silhouette kind of is, and it's because they're coming at it from a different angle, which is really interesting. And then I want to get these sorted out to some extent. Because this isn't, I got a little sloppy on those. I was trying to wrap up. Because I was passing out, y'all. I was going to fall right asleep on stream. And that's... Actually, I think Twitch allows that again, but it's still probably not really the content that I'm going for. Not Helm Base. Oh no, how much did I do on Helm Base? Okay. Good. Good. Always with the wrong layers. Okay, we'll try to get this sorted though. I do want to make sure that we're trending more in line with how these actually kind of work, which is a softer... Like the point itself is still fairly soft. There's a nice opening there. We'll have another one that just kind of ekes into it a little bit and works down. This one coming up, once again, really soft. Oh, interesting. We could actually... Okay, we can arc it down a little bit. I'd love to see what kind of like bird feather and or leaf pattern they were going for with this. Like what they were basing it on, because it's really interesting. I noticed they were doing some interesting stuff with spacing too, of having like smaller ones hidden in the crevices. Let's... Keep on making our way down here. Funny, once you figure out sort of the logic behind it and you've got the spacing, these get much easier, but they were so just impossible for me to figure out earlier. Yeah, and then this one, of course. And the upper one. I observed the same things, but it just, second time it worked. Funny how that is. There we go. We'll get some of these not intermediate, but I guess in a way they're in the middle, which is inter and medium. So, yeah, I guess reasonably. Go. Just a few more in there. Then we get these front ones, and these are interesting. Because technically they're kind of tucked in behind these other ones. And in fact, I probably ought to just draw them as tucked in and interlaced rather than leaving the spaces. But I'm kind of leaving the spaces. It seems to be reasonable to emphasize, although it's not significantly more than the other ones. So yeah, actually, maybe we don't do that. All of these, which I'm not gonna do the the inner lines that actually show the angle until we've got all these exteriors sorted out and I can hide the underlying layer. That way I'll be able to tell what's on which layer, and I'll know that I've got my proportions sorted before I overcommit. Let's see. I We'll come in here. That said, I do still want them to look like they don't quite line up. And that one just kind of works as is. I can taper it a little bit, leave some slightly bigger gaps, that's okay. Like that one there, I think makes sense. Because the point goes in the middle, then the peak kind of lines up with, yeah, not necessarily head on, but it kind of lines up with that. We'll just keep on bringing these in. Sorry, just doing this now is kind of like almost like, not meditative, but it feels like we're just kind of in the zone, you know? And since we're not doing the gaps, we can make that one a little more authentic like that. And okay. Now it's funny. Actually, that is really funny. The arrows kind of look like ridge lines on them already, which works weirdly well. But if we were to say hide this temporary alignment layer, you can see it's all flat. Although these, it's interesting actually, both in the original and in these, but it doesn't look as much in the original because of the way they're angled, I suppose. But they're, like, technically these end up coming out at a more aggressive point. Actually, what I'm seeing is I probably ought to soften the curve on some of these, although I kind of like the Scarlet Ionia vibe it's giving, so I may leave them to their business, add the ridge, and see what happens. So they've all got the ridge line. Always emanates from this point. I can add a little scuff, of course, but not too worried about doing that right now. Bit of flavor, though. It's nice. It should track roughly, but not precisely down the center. Sometimes you'll get one that's at kind of a weird angle. There we go. And then same deal with these internal ones, although not always. Like, they genuinely do look more rounded in the actual model, but it may just be the angle of the light. We'll just do a little. Like some of these inner ones, it's barely even like visible. Other ones, it's more so. I guess, yeah, really, it has to be a light angle thing then. That one probably won't be very visible at all, but this one would be more so. I guess part of it's also that I'm not really continuing these all the way quite as far as I ought to be. Because they need to be connecting into the funky little stem piece at some point. And it goes like this. Thought that might be where that was. There's sort of the second piece in here. Some of these connect in too, but not really always. Sort of implied. And it's definitely there. Just the lighting doesn't really highlight it very much, so How are we looking with that? That's looking pretty good. At least matches the level of detail, if not the line sharpness of this section. Actually, yeah, that is interesting. These look a lot more crisp, and I think it's because they're darker. Whereas these ones up here all... Yeah, except for these smaller ones where with the small curves I ended up using darker lines. Okay, that makes sense. Cool. I was wondering why this section turned out so much more... Again, I think the word I'm looking for is crisp. I'm okay with that, though. Okay, so there's helm, face, neck, pauldron, cloak. One more. Which... Actually, face, neck should be under helm. And then this should be under that. Not in it. I suppose when you're nesting things, it's not always clear when you say under. But in this case, we want the hair. Now, this is admittedly one that I'm a little worried about. So I may take me just a slight pause before we jump into it too much, because we're looking at some pretty challenging hair stuff going on. And I don't want it to just be these big chunks, because when we get to inking and line work, these big chunks aren't going to look good. And even if we don't do inking so much on the hair and we're just doing shapes, I still need a better idea for the textures and shapes. So, I'm going to admit that I actually have to use the restroom really bad. I'm sorry for having to do that right early in the stream. But I'm going to do that and think this one through a little bit, and then we'll come back to it for the last, best as I can tell, the last piece that needs to be properly done like this. And then we're just getting to inks, which is a whole different world, but honestly, might be easier. With each stage, up until we start getting to well, actually even flats don't really require much, but up until we get to shading, each stage is going to get progressively less thought required. So inks should be fun, actually. And with that, I'll be back in just a second. Howdys and salutations. Sorry about the wait there. We are back in action. So let's do this. Let's actually have a go at this hair. Yeah, I should actually make a layer to put it on. I can't just draw on a folder. Unlike real life when you can totally draw on a folder, but it's probably a good thing that CSP doesn't let you. I feel like that would lead to some issues. It's like, wasn't just the wrong layer, it wasn't a layer at all. Then you know folder layers would interact with everything else differently, and it would just be awful. Oh wait, no, that's the one layer I actually want. Really. Fold everything else. Oops. We're fading a little bit, so we can keep our focus. A lot of different types of materials and stuff going on with this. It's actually probably not a bad illustration to pick up with. It's just, as always, fairly complicated. Okay, mechanical pencil going to be right for this. Question is, how do we want to do this? Because this isn't just like, you know, like easily blocked out, like bangs and junk. There's a lot going on here, and even then, like, this is a pretty terrible way to draw easily blocked out bangs and junk, so probably should have actually figured out where I wanted the face to be. They've got like a shark fin thing going now. I don't know where I'm going with this face. They've got way too much hair for what they ought to have, though. Okay, we're gonna put that one away. Zoop. Did a right terrible job of that. No matter. Let those be. But the point is, I don't know. Typically when drawing a face, like, I'm worried about big shapes. Even with different hairstyles, you know. And I do a lot of bangs, don't I? But even like with different hairstyles, it's the big shapes that I'm like worrying about. And I'm trying to figure out how is best to do this, because that's what we did with our super rough. But trying to figure out what we actually want the line work for this hair to be. Or if it should even have line work compared to the rest. Like maybe it just has internal lines. But even then, where should those land? So like, because hair is easy to define by chunks. But when it's really wild like this, it's not that easy to define by chunks. Or at least, I don't have a lot of experience with it. Oh, I've ruined that face. Not just because of the angle. Totally turning into that Duolingo girl. Anyway, well, racing that one felt ominous for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe it's because the eye and mouth remained, so it looked like it had a sad expression, like as I erased it. Anyway, shouldn't let that get in my head. I haven't messed with Duolingo in a while. The owl's probably gonna hunt me down, but like, I don't know. I swooped in, got like not a million points, but a ton of points because I'd already taken a bunch of German classes, and then I practiced for like a week, and then I never went back. So, like, I don't know. I'm not sure what the best approach on those apps is. Like, is it better? Here's an actual question. Because each thing usually has, like, there's a path with one or two, like, little spots in it. Each of those spots is like a theme, sorta. And then, like, you do them and you unlock further spots down the path, but you've got a few options there. Is it better to continue further down the path, or to keep ranking up the one spot you're at, going to higher and higher, like, difficulties on that one little circle? Because these are all within, like, difficulty tiers for the language, but, like, you've got a ton of exercises per circle that you can keep ranking up. Or Okay, what am I doing? Oh, I'm on the eraser. That's why. Cool. But, like, is it better to do that, or is it better to keep moving on to new topics? Like, obviously, ideal is both, but, like, what order? How do I know which one to do next? Okay, obviously there's, like, a lot going on with this hair. And even in the game, it's a little janky, so that makes this, honestly, harder to deal with. I'm going to go for an outline first. We'll see how far that gets us. Knowing full well that there's like a bunch of different things going on within these outlines. That's the one that kind of went up, looked like it sat on there. Zips up over. It actually ends up coming out higher up. Interesting. We were doing this as just like another way I like to think of hair is as ribbons, which is also not a good approximation, but it's not a bad way when you're trying to come up with new hair patterns to get interesting creative flows that then you can sort of like add some volume to make into actual shapes. Of course, that's not actually how that one's working because it's really one ribbon down and then a separate one that's kind of like intertwining with it, but also not how we want to draw this particularly. Okay. We've got the gap in here, and then most of these strands are in sync up to this point, right above here. So I'm going to draw them as such. Whoops. Not quite what I was aiming for there. And it's got the second bit, because this one, like, kinda does something like that. And both of them end up sort of tapering off into just a bunch of different threads, and I guess, man, I could have the line work do that. That's not crazy difficult. I mean, it's not great, but especially because if I'm not careful, they end up awkwardly parallel, and it's jarring. Which, to be fair, kind of happening here too. Or maybe I just have personally really stinking curly hair, and so this looks weird to me, but nor other people can do it. I have no way to know. I mean, there's ways to know. And treat this sort of the way that you treat brickwork on buildings, where instead of drawing the whole brickwork, or at least, you know, this one technique for dealing with brickwork on buildings, instead of doing the whole brickwork, you pick out a few lines, more of them where it's in shadow. You just kind of have them roughly follow the pattern. Just gonna keep on. Like this one has a few stray lines even, so that's good too. I can work with that. Well, this one has a few that go and join the fray up here. And I do mean fray in every sense of the word. That one needs to start further back so that it doesn't look like they're just parallel lines that I'm throwing in. Just this is all sort of within the larger body of this one. Whereas these are just kind of freestanding. They kind of just peter out at some point. Actually, hold on. That wasn't a bad line. Yeah, kind of like what that's doing. It helps show that this is dispersing and it's not just a solid object, whereas this one is. Or, you know, can add an edge to it to fill in for the actual edge of where this will land. That's a cluster. That's just freeform after a while. This kind of continues up, so we can get some like under curls there. Of course, we don't want it to actually look like it's just a 3D block. Texturing is going to be interesting for this part. I think that texture is where I'm going to be able to get more of this definition, but I don't know how to do that yet. So that's going to, I don't want to over rely on it, and I want to give myself as good of a shot as possible of nailing it before the texture. Trying to make this flow naturally while still getting the cool exaggeration, that's going to be tough. It should be this one on top. But ultimately still point down because it's kind of like a split there. Oh, they've got other things going on here. I like this little stray friggin' the bit down here. Kind of doing its thing. But yeah, like that's been my worry with the hair, is I don't entirely know what to do to make it even like slightly reasonable. I mean, that, other than the two overly dominant snakes in the front, which are kind of just overly dominant in the original too, so like I don't know what to tell you. I like what's happening here. I like some of the interior lines over here, although a little more overtwine and stuff fighting the pattern a little more might be good. Also, some of these interior ones are a little bit too bold. It's going to cause confusion. Okay, well, and getting the color flats in for that are going to be a mess. Just going to have to actually like gradient it out. I should clarify, for no reason at all, I am like super wary of gradients. I think it's because I recognized when I was early on and I was looking at other art of people at my like, you know, early experience level, I saw so many bad ones where like they just blended colors into each other, and especially where they were just using gray, like black and white, to add shading tones, and it ended up looking muddy. And so I was like, I want mine to look crisp and clear, like good, like stickers. I don't want it to look muddy. But now I'm at the point where like I'd like to learn how to actually do it right, which is complicated. I think we're just about set on this stage, though. Now, of course, what that means is, whoops. Well, we can dual flip it. Let's go ahead and do some flippy do on this too, just to see where we're at. Yes, lighting and shadow are going to be fun. Genuinely, I love that part. And there's so many ways we can do it. But I think, like, you know, some of the line weight stuff ain't great, especially because I've got so many of these faded out. I should probably undo that now. Cauldron is still really bold compared to everything else. But, yeah, there we go. I think it's time. Time for a new layer, and not whatever the check mark I accidentally just selected was. I've got to figure out what that check mark is, what checking in the checkbox does. I assume it just means that you're applying whatever you're doing, like, you're choosing that layer to be messing with, but, like... Like, I don't know what you do from there. I don't know how that's different from just selecting it not in the checkbox. Is it? Like, I feel like it's gotta be, right? Okay, inks. I'm going to handle in, I think, fewer separate pieces than I handled the roughs. First off, let's get ourselves back into our normal view. Wow, I disoriented myself there and thought for sure that I've been drawing it facing that way, like the opposite direction the whole time. That got in my head. How are we doing on just a horizontal flip, by the way? Nose looks slightly more up and pretentious than I'm seeing on this one, but otherwise... and slant of shoulder actually looks more, which is kind of what I want. So yeah, the pauldron shoulder for the record. I'm okay with that. The motion is good. Again, we got so much of our pose already from the awesome reference image that I'm not super worried. But it's always good to triple check these things. So I think with the inks, I'm going to sort it more by the full folders of what we had before. Now that the exception may be the fabric-y cloak parts. But like, I think the whole pauldron ought to be one layer in the ink. I think the same of the helm. Now that we're not messing around with individual elements, positioning and fine details and layering as much there, I'm trying to think if that would matter in terms of coloring. Like, we throw the flats down. Would it be helpful to have these on different layers? For shading, it might be. Ooh, for shading, it might be. Although technically for shading, all that matters are the flats being on different layers and not the inks. So... yeah, I think we'll do the inks on fewer layers, and the flats, we're going to basically be, like... we're going to have a million layers for that. This is why we deal with our folder management early. Okay, but inks are 100% vector. If anything, these are really where vectors shine the most. And so now the question is, which one do we want to use? I'm definitely leaning towards Millipen for this. I like Millipen. It's easy to control. Gets me nice, clean lines. And if I want bolder lines, I can do that, and it still looks clear. And again, we can do multiple ink attempts. I just don't, I'd like to get a finished project before I do variants, if possible. There's flat marker, which is fun, but not really useful for this. We've got our fun Windows XP screensaver pen, which I don't even remember why I call it that. Maybe it's because of that one line that would like have the back fade away as you drew with it. That used to be a screensaver back in the days. Ballpoint, of course, is this. Like, have I tweaked this one? Did I mess with this one or something? It feels weird. I mean, maybe it just always had the big dot on the end. I don't know. But all those are technically markers. Looking at the pens, I mean, the options really, like the G pen mapping has I like mapping too in Turnip. I'm not really looking for textured right now. Like, don't get me wrong, it's a nice pen. And it does kind of get the weathered look, but I've kind of got my pencil for that already. Calligraphy is for a different purpose, and also that's way too small to really see it. There we go. I like calligraphy, but not for this. Turnip pen. Good control, good taper. Might be a good opportunity to practice taper. That's not usually something I do. That's true of mapping in G-Pen as well. I know personally, well, I don't know how well it'll work for this. I may want two different types, truthfully. I think for the metal, I want the Millipen. No question. But for things like the hair and for things like fabric, I may want one of these ones that has more taper to it, in which case I'd be inclined towards, I believe it was mapping that has a really smooth edge, or, oh, turnip even has a really smooth edge too. Yeah, so I may do that for fabrics, but I still would rather use the Milli pen for most of our lines. Okay, and I'm gonna keep on this gray for now. There's easy ways we can add filters and stuff to layers. There's other words for it, but I've not learned them well yet. I just gotta use a bigger vector eraser for this. Like, come on, man. There we go. Now I need to set that back to smaller, or it's gonna blow up my entire drawing later. Let's see, we could do 4 for a pretty fine point. Kind of inclined towards 5, truthfully. It sort of depends on what we end up trying to do. Let's try it with this, and we'll see how it goes. This is where if you thought I was being fiddly with my lines before, ho ho, get ready for some real line fiddling, because it's going to be ridiculous. Of course, we fade that out, and the rough outlines are now just gone. I mean, I haven't deleted them, they're still there, but like we don't need them for this. They were wonderful to help us get our proportions sorted, and they have completed that task. Oops, that was the wrong button. W instead of E. This is feeling really bold compared to what I had before. We'll see if that's what we want. And in this one, it's basically no thoughts, head empty. I'm just trying to follow the original lines pretty much exactly or close to it. With Milli pen, pressure and angle, none of that matters. It is a flat tone across the whole thing. Which may not be what we want for this drawing, truthfully. But I'm sort of waiting to see on that. It's already feeling really aggressive and bad at showing important line weight differences. We do want turnip or the other one for this. Oops. I got that too big. Yeah, I'm thinking this ain't what we want for this. Okay, I'm pulling back on that a little bit. Like, don't get me wrong, I like those clean lines, and they're going to be harder to do. But, it's going to go rough, make it massive, clear everything out. Let's try this again, and let's try the mapping pen. Again, I have a lot less experience with this one, so we're going to see how it goes. This is the part where we get to the stuff I haven't done as much. The shocker, when you do a bunch of projects that aren't really designed to be like finished illustration types, tend not to bother with the inking as much. Nope, not that one. You can tell how often I make the mistake of just assuming that the eraser tool is going to be where I thought I left it, which frequently isn't where I actually left it. Whoops. Right now, this isn't that different from if I'd just taken the Milli pen and, like, made it smaller and slightly lighter gray. I'm not sold that, I mean, I'm sold that this is definitely looking better. I'm just not sold that I couldn't have done this exact same thing or a reasonably, like, achieved the same goal I was looking for with the Milli pen. Well, we'll just have to wait and see. There we go. At this stage, requires less brain, frankly less focus, and really just more patience. Mainly because I think most people, a lot of the stuff I did on the last step, I think is what most people would bother with on this step. Okay, hold on. There we go. Confused me for a minute. What is happening? There's something on my... Ooh, that's getting real jumpy. My drag and drop was like messed up there for a second. I don't know what's up with that. It's still weird. I don't know if that's lag or what's going on with that. I kind of want a more wobbly line there. I'm going to intentionally take it slow. I'm never going to remember which which ones I've done and which I haven't, because these are so close together in like tone. Like this is really light, which is fine. And again, that's something we can change later with filters and layers and stuff. I'm just I guess I'm just at the point where I don't entirely know how it's going to end. So like how this will turn out. So I'm just going to sort of work with it and see where it takes us. But it also means I don't have a lot in the way of meaningful commentary for this part. I am going to try to play with line weight a little bit, though. That is the benefit of these tapers, is they allow you to do that without manually changing the line weight. Deal with the pen pressure. Whew. Yeah, I gotta say, actually following curves is not bad when you've got decent posture. Although I'm still resting my wrist on this way too much. But like for the big curves, I'm at least at an angle where I can use my whole shoulder, and I literally can't use my elbow even if I wanted to. I don't know if it's a good posture angle, but it's at least forcing me to just be flexible with my posture. I don't want these to be heavier, so I'm gonna, but not like crazy heavy. Like the silhouette is still more important, and even these holes are more important than the differences between the feathers here. I kind of want this section, truthfully, I want this whole section to kind of blur together, the viewer's eye, unless they really take a look at it. I'm not trying to draw attention to the interlinked bronze feathers, whatchamacallit. Before you ask why I'm not sure, like, yes, obviously, it's the winged helm kind of deal, but also their motif is so plant and vine based, and the wings that they do have are more of bug wings, like you'd see on a ladybug, or one of them roaches that fly, but like choosing to go with ladybug even though their theme is rot. I left myself a nasty curve to line up right here. It intersects with so much other stuff. Okay. I know it's been a while since I've talked about the vector lines and what exactly the benefit is. There's a lot of them, but the one that I use the most, and it kills me I don't remember which video. I mean, I distinctly remember the video. I can picture it in my head. It's a famous comic artist, or webcomic artist anyway, with like, it's not the odd ones out, but they've got the similar concept of like little like white orb people, and he's got a cool gray baseball cap, and he's done a lot of cool stuff. But his videos are the reason I even got Clip Studio Paint and learned about the vector tool and what it could do, because it does just make life easier. The big one is that I use the most, and you see me using it all the time, is if I have two lines and they're intersecting, I can hold down erase or just have the eraser out, and if I run through the vector line, it erases it up to the intersection. And there's a few different modes here. I can erase just touched areas like you'd see on a normal eraser, erase up to intersection, or I can clear out the whole line, like ignoring the intersection. If I want to get rid of a line that's got a lot of overlap, I can just clear that whole one out. Which, for the record, is an option I should use more when I've got big old squiggle messes. But I always forget about it. Because this up to intersection one is so powerful. Because you can overshoot your lines. It basically gives you the freedom to overshoot your lines, which means you can focus less on stopping in the right place and more on just moving in the right direction, which makes it so much easier to line the darn things up. And then you just clean up whatever goes too far. And it's crazy, crazy easy. Also, I mean, it also means that if you get a line like a slightly off with the right shape, you can move it. Or I can move these individual points to actually warp the line. Or there's a whole array of vector tools. Like this one lets me just grab those control points, so like the little highlighted white dots, so I can move them around. I can pinch sections of it. I've got the range really small. So like I can just sort of like casually grab it, and it's like a little wire that moves. I can simplify it, so I can have fewer of those control points, and it'll just calculate from like the 1 point here. So you see we've got a bunch there. We smooth it, and simplifying it makes it smoother, but it also makes it less controllable and less detailed. So it's a balancing thing. Not a bad idea if you're getting lag on a really massive project, though. Connecting vector lines, if I have two of the darn things, line A, line B, I'm like, I'd really like them to just be one thing. I can grab this, and I can make it bigger, and I can just run over that thing, and theoretically they'll connect. Sometimes they don't. It helps if their ends are near each other. See, now it's one thing. That one's probably the jankiest tool of the bunch, although pinch can be as well. I like adjust line width, because it allows you to mess with your line width, obviously. You can make it smaller too, you can adjust the amount and all that jazz. Or you can just set it to a fixed one. But that allows you to adjust line weight after you've already drawn something, which is super nice. Redraw lets you like say, I don't like how the end of that worked, I'm gonna just move the whole darn thing. And it's really funky in some of its mechanics. It's also like, it also makes it like you're moving a metal line, but it's a little jumpy, but for like little sections, it's not bad. And redrawing width lets you, it's basically like that tool, but you can just do sections. I can do lighter, or I can push down harder and get really wide. But those are still just vector lines, so I can erase them just as easily. Really, really handy feature. I love these things. But we're still on size 6. Remember that, future me. Then I should have the closed top, because we're going to want to do flats, and having the ability to use the color fill will be a lifesaver. Now, some of you, the odds are no one will ask this question, but some of you who've used Clip Studio Paint a little bit will say, hey, you can't color fill on the vector line layers. Because the part of this is we've got vector and normal layers. Like, those are raster layers, the other one, it's not normal. Because they think differently. And so you can't fill on a vector layer, but you can make it so that a raster layer basically points to the vector layer, so the fill will stay on the raster layer, but it will stay within the bounds of the vector line, so it still works the same. And since you probably ought to be doing your colors and lines on different layers anyway for good practice, that's, I don't know, pretty good. Pretty, it's a win-win. Encourages good practice, and it's easy. Trying to go it slow never really goes well, but sometimes if it's like really wonky like this, going fast also doesn't go well. And in any case, I'm actually okay with a little gap there, so I'd rather have it like that. This one's got an awful lot of gap for what's going on, so let's maybe get a little less gap. Still have to continue all the way down, yeah. Okay. Guess I can also talk about the logic between vector and raster layers a little bit. I won't stop drawing while I do this, because again, this is like brainless now. But the big difference is a raster layer, basically what you're telling the computer is, hey, here's a grid of pixels. This is my masterpiece, or my garbage sketch, whatever you want. It's the grid. It's a grid. That's what a layer is. It's just a grid of pixels. And a raster layer, when you've got your brushes and all those tools, they're basically just figuring out different ways to tell the grid, save this pixel is this color, this pixel is that color, this pixel is so on. And you can add layers and filters and stuff that just say, hey, alter the below pixels by X amount, or X tone, or X shade, or whatever. But it's all stored by pixel. It doesn't actually know that you've got a shape. You draw a square, it doesn't know it's a square. It just knows there's pixel at like 6.5, 6.6, 6.7, 6.8, 6.9, 6.10, 7.5 and 7.10, 8.5 and 8.10, so on and so forth down. It doesn't know they're related. And that's great for a lot of things. It's easy to store, it's easy to work with, it's easy to code. Like that's, okay, obviously CSP does a lot more with it and the layers and all that, but like you can make a pretty, like a basic art tool with comparatively minimal effort. Like it's not hard to program those. Because yeah, it's just dealing with the grid and then like an array of arrays or a two-dimensional array and all that. Like it's very easy computer logic. It's very easy interface to work with. It makes sense to a person too. It's great. But there's some things that it's really inconvenient for, or that vectors just do better. And a lot of that is like the line manipulation stuff that I did before. Like you can tell when we were moving stuff, it had to know that all those pixels were connected because, well, I'd tweak one thing on the line and the whole rest of the line would change. And that's what a vector is in art. In physics, a vector is a direction and a speed. Here it's just a direction basically, but it is a line, but it's the computer actually knows it's a line. The way it stores the file is actually smaller. Well, it depends. Okay, I don't know how CSP encodes it. It can be smaller depending on how you do it. But the point is, it actually knows there's a line. It doesn't know squat about the pixels. It knows there is a line that does that. And then it also has instructions that say, for this line, make sure that width is X, color is X, so on. And so then it follows those instructions to display it and actually color the pixels. So it's not remembering details about the pixels so much as it's remembering details about the line. Now, obviously, vector and raster layers can interact. They're all still pixels on a grid, but in the vector layers, it knows. Well, when you use a vector tool, it just works. On the vector layers, it's not remembering it as pixel 1.7 is gray. It's remembering, there is a line that goes from X position to Y position, and it follows. It basically remembers each of these control points, and then it knows the relationship between that control point and the two adjacent ones. So if you tweak stuff, it knows how to just calculate the line between it. It knows how sharp the curve should be, and so on. And so you just give it these points and where they are, and it can just figure out the line between them. And it's pretty cool. Not exactly new tech, but implemented really, really nicely and cleanly in CSP. I will say, because here's the other thing, a lot of programs are vector or raster. Like, they're just fundamentally structured to be one or the other. I think that it's like GIMP is one, it's a very powerful tool, but it's very heavily vector focused. And if you're not already pretty familiar with vectors and you're just looking for a drawing program, it's going to feel weird as all get out. A lot of other stuff is only raster. Or like it's vector, but it's not optimized for vector. They just kind of threw it in there because some people use it and asked for it. And like it's not got the same power that it could. Or it doesn't interact as like nicely with other layers. Like you've got to have a vector or a raster project or different things. So CSP does a really nice job of it. And again, I'm not here to pitch CSP. I know everyone's got complaints about the sales model. I don't know what to say. Like I'm old enough to remember the era where you just had to keep buying a new like software every time they updated the dang thing, which is just subscription but worse. But like I also understand objections to the subscription. I feel like CSP is approaching it reasonably well, but they super botched their early communications about it. And given that so much of their community is migrants from Adobe, expressly because Adobe subscriptions are so insanely predatory and garbo. And by that, I mostly mean they're massively overpriced because it's an industry standard, the same way that TI calculators are. So, like, yeah, they should have probably been aware that their audience was going to be highly sensitive to that. But no matter, because I think they've mostly sorted out. They've explained a lot of the complaints and questions people had were like, "Am I going to lose access? Am I going to like?" A lot of the questions were answered in the original post, and you can tell people didn't read it all the way. And that was frustrating. I was like, guys, there are valid questions and complaints here, but those aren't the ones you're asking. Like, get your act together. But sorry, that like it's unfair, but if you're going to lodge a complaint, make sure you have the full information. I wish people did this in politics, but like for something like this, it's super easy to do. It's literally on the screen right there. So like, I don't know. Sorry, that turned into a little bit of a rant there, but it's like, just, I hate to be the guy who says, like, you know, like, go read the instructions to harp on people, but like, if it is literally on, like, on the same screen you're on right now, your complaint is answered, please read it first. Like, I'm not the kind of person who's going to go and tell you, like, oh, you don't know something, like, don't ask people, but do read the basic initial thing first. Like, I'm not saying you need to go Google deeper, like, you don't have to go do a Google deep dive or whatever, but like, if the answer's already been literally handed to you on a silver platter, not literally, they didn't actually have a silver platter, but like, it has been displayed on screen, like right there, like, please read it. I guess the word literally really is dead. I used to be such a grammar fiend back in my day. It's not dead, it's just taken on new use. And actually, truthfully, I am still a grammar fiend, but I've discovered the wonderful realization that makes life much easier, that language is evolving. And that doesn't mean that every use is correct, but it does mean that, uses can change and it doesn't murder the language or whatever. Like, it's not like English has the greatest default set of rules to begin with. I don't know why we're so protective of them. They're really awful. Really bad. Like, I before C except after E, or no, wait. I before E except after C has more exceptions than it's actually correct. It's literally the wrong rule. It's just correct in more common words that we should teach children. And so, like, it seems like a rule, but, like, it's bad. That said, get your stinking yours and theirs right. That can actually confuse the heck out of people if you mix those up. And they're, like, look, lay, lie, lied, so on, or like affect versus affect. Yeah, those use cases are really stinking bizarre. Like, you've got to actually remember, like, the part of speech and a few other contexts, and, like, I get it if people mix those up. Whatever. But the yours and the theirs are pretty straightforward rules they actually follow, and, like, they do add a lot of clarity. They're worth figuring out. It's one of those minimal effort, pretty significant improvement, as opposed to figuring out effect versus effect. Almost no one's ever going to call you on that. People notice your, there, so on. But people don't notice effect, effect. Nobody cares about those. Some people do. By the way, if you want to circumvent that, just say impact. You're like, does this affect things? Does it effect things? No, 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 no. Does it impact things? Does it influence things? Does it alter the plans? Like, actually, this is a fun way. If you want better vocabulary, one way to do it is to dodge annoying word situations. Like, you can't always dodge your and there, but affect and effect, you can totally come up with cooler ways to say things that just skip right past ever having to actually say either of those words. You can go your whole life without saying them again, most likely, unless you're like on a game show and it's the answer or something. Or like you've got a boss who's a real stickler about exact phrasing and they hate the word impact. Which, I mean, don't get me wrong, impact sounds a little like not as bad as synergize, but it definitely sounds like you're trying to be trendy business, you know? Like, what are the impacts of this on? But like, it's better. Certainly better than synergize. Nobody stinking says synergize. You want to know the problem with synergize? Is it is an obscure business term that is exclusively used in situations where you're trying to communicate stuff to people and improve communication. And one of the key ways to improve communication is to not use obscure business terms. Like, they talk about that a lot. Don't use acronyms that people aren't familiar with. Like, honestly, the more you can explain what something is and avoid an acronym, the better, because it'll help people across different roles in your business do well and like understand it. It'll help new employees and like contractors and stuff understand it. Don't get too married to your buzzwords and to your like acronyms. They're really handy, but it's worth like making sure that you're actually communicating stuff and not like slowly drowning everyone around you in technobabble. Because it's an easy thing to do. You get caught up, you know your industry, you know, or at least you know your job, you know the term, you know what people call the, be it the air fryer or like the mechanical part you're designing or the chemical formula or the medical term, whatever your job entails, you're going to know the terms for it. And they're going to make sense to you after a while. And you're going to forget what it was like to not know them. And that's part of expertise. But remembering how to not become an incomprehensible mess is part of being an expert and still being able to actually function in society and teach people and get people interested in what you do. So, like, it's a balancing act. Why you have so many teachers who are difficult to, especially in math, so many teachers who are difficult to follow, because, you know, they no longer know what it was like to be a beginner. Like, an inherent part of an expert is inherently putting a lot of the beginner stuff in muscle memory or in, like, just not direct conscious memory. So you inherently have to forget how to be a beginner in order to really be an expert. But if you want true mastery of it, you need to figure it out again so you can communicate it to other people. And therein lies the great challenge. Remembering how to start over. Someone could write $1 million book on, like, from expert to beginner. Like that, going back, figuring out how to communicate this stuff to people who don't know it yet. Because it's really important. It comes up a lot in life, and people are really bad at it. It's understandably, it's a bizarre thing. So like, I don't know, $1 million idea out there for someone who wants to do it. Alternatively, $1 million idea out there, if somebody is interested in chronicling the whole process of going from being a beginner to being an expert, sort of like these streams, although I, started a little late in that process even so, but chronicle the stuff you struggled with, what was confusing, what it felt like having to deal with the, like, kind of vague blur of stuff that you've heard about but you don't fully understand yet. Get that stuff written down for any given industry, any given field, any given hobby, anything that you do. Publish the heck out of that. It'll be amazing. Like, throw in some insights about, like, how to better communicate. Like, say, like, okay, given that this was the problem, like, teacher should really be talking about like in XYZ terms rather than in like complicated or confusing term. Like here's things you need to focus on when you're teaching someone this, so on. Which again, by that point you're an expert in the topic because you've done enough practice and chronicled it that you know what you're doing. So like it's an easy book to write while learning something unrelated, which is kind of awesome, I think. And I think it would be valuable for a lot of people. Like that's not $1 million idea. That's a bunch of them because everything needs a better handbook. It's just the truth. Everything always needs a better handbook because the best handbook eventually gets outdated. Galen's medical textbook. Wonderful for a very long time. Not like amazingly perfect today by modern standards. It has some flaws and needs updates, and these days stuff gets out of date much faster. Like heck, ideal business management guides from 30 years ago would be considered really bad practice today. A lot of them. And it's interesting. Because we talk about different things to motivate people, different things to take care of employees, and so on. How are we looking on this? Interesting. Not necessarily better than the sketchy layer, though, which is kind of funny. I may have gone into too much detail in my fine detail outline, so as to render the ink almost kind of moot. I could kind of look at them side by side. I guess I could. Like I could just drag the layer over and then undo. I'm going to do that. I mean, line weight is not great, but that can be adjusted. Line weight's better on the sketch, of course. I mean, we could use the sketch as the final, too. I'd need a little cleanup, but not nearly so much. I mean, some parts like the pauldron basically wouldn't. Like, yeah, there's a lot of wonk in this, but it's not important wonk. This is an interesting development that I should have seen coming, honestly. Do we actually want to ink this, or is this what we kind of already did? Because, I mean, if all I want is a boulder line, then, give me a second. Do a raster layer. I'm going to... I don't want to clip to the layer below. I want to clip to the folder below, functionally. I don't know that that's going to work. But we'll see. Anyway, I'm going to get a marker. Oh, yeah, you could get some fun effects with this, actually. But no, I just want... Okay, I want the brush. Let's go to... I just want a giant milli pen. Just want a giant flat color. We're going to see if this works. Yeah, I didn't think that would. Okay, I need this too. Let's set as reference layer. Now for this one. Oh, yeah, no, I don't want this one as the reference layer. This one is the reference layer. I want it to multiply. I just want to overlay it, basically. I want it to be that. I want to clip it to the lower layers. Only drawing over them. How? And I'm sure there's a way to do this. But I may actually have to look it up. Getting flashbacks to the Blender tutorials, having to go and straight up Google things mid-class. I call this class. Ha! Mid-art session, okay. ESP clip to multiple layers. Clipping a layer to a group. Ask clipstudio.com. Clipping in the lower layer composite mode 2 years ago. Now there's a user guide. Let's try it. Change palette bending to layer below. That is reference layer. I haven't fully understood the point of the reference layer. There's a section on that, but I'm going to try not to get distracted by that right now. Enable, okay, hold on. I need to figure out the difference between masks versus just clipping layers, because there are differences. And show the layers in 2 panes. That's not really my goal. Combine layers, but I don't want to do that. Okay, this guide you linked me to didn't talk about the thing you mentioned. Reddit post. Let's see if this answers it. It might be a blending mode thing. Well, we could do multiply. I think it would function for what we're trying to do. Not for these, though. This one. Multiply. Nope. Nope. Wonder which layer it's reading as the layer below. Oh, okay, there we go. Okay, so I literally just had to move it out from that folder so it was actually directly above this. I don't think I even need this as the reference layer, truthfully. And do both of those, and it's just connected to it. Heck, I wonder if I could even make this normal. How did I? Okay. Yep. Not having much of an impact, mind. No longer convinced it's having any impact while under normal. Nope, it just managed to draw some lines. That, I think, may have... Yeah, that's having an impact, although not a ton. But if we did this in a darker color, we could really brighten it up. Or if we even just did it in solid black. I guess by definition, that's not brightening it up, but you know. But it does get us bolder lines than when we don't have it. I have these on like lower opacity still or something. Oh, yeah. Okay, there we go. So now that gives us really sharp lines if that's what we want, which is kind of an interesting look. We can also go for this one from the Golden Sunset palette if we want, like, I mean, it's still multiply, so we're not actually getting those colors. It's like lighten would get us a different thing. It's basically just darkening. We'll go through those some other time. It's not that important right now. My screen. Oh, screen might be what we want. I don't remember the exact details about how that one works, but it seems to be doing what we want. Like I can just throw whichever color on this. This one would just make it not quite vanish, but awful on the eyes. Nice blue. We could even go and see what our baseline 686868 does for us. Interestingly, still feels slightly blue. I don't think it is. I think it's just my eyes compared to the black that we had earlier. Interesting. Well, yeah, okay, so screen layer is what we want. Am I sure that's not blue? Interesting. May have to mega erase the whole thing. There we go. So there's our basic layer. I think, okay, so screen still has some impact on what's happening here. That's not quite the same as if we just use the gray, but, oh yeah. But yeah, so that's basically a filter of it. So if we wanted to do that, we could. It's also something where if I wanted to mess with the vector lines and make them thicker, we could do that too. But, I mean, we've spent a lot of effort on line weight and stuff already. I'm actually fairly happy with where that's at. I mean, some stuff could be tweaked. Helmet outline being a key example. But, okay, yeah. It feels like the inks are kind of redundant at this point. We can do them, don't get me wrong. Just not sure we need to. Which unfortunately puts me ahead of what I'd actually sort of mentally prepped to do today. I'm just gonna not worry about that right now. Okay. Let's grayscale this. Myself a nice palette here. This is a palette I made myself based on some tips I saw somewhere. I think EGS. Well, anyway. Shadow value blocking. Right, I'd done like a super basic thing for a thumbnail at one point, so that's not really going to be useful here. I guess what we can do, real quick, just to see it, is to piece together all of the sort of like soft shading stuff I'd done for thumbnails. We can take a look at that real quick. I'm just going to call this one hair. There wasn't a lot. Could have done multiple layers there. We definitely will want to with the color. Face. Elm shading. You can obviously see like where exactly I'd zoomed in for each thumbnail. Like this is not the full drawing, obviously. And even for this one, we'll probably do like the hair and something similar. And this has been with the color palette. I believe it is Golden Sunset from Low Spec. Let me double check that. Yeah, Golden Sunset. That was another one from Low Spec. And yeah, it's been I don't know, it's been good. It's been fun to do. They look good on thumbnails. I don't know how well they look big or overlapped, although I think the pauldron looked really cool. And the actual one, I'd probably go for a different style on shading, although it's, this has been interesting. I think the biggest issue is I got, like, on the fabric and fur, I was doing way too big of strokes. And also those sections are really big and, like, not necessarily as detailed, and so, like, my actual, like, strokes were more obvious and kind of messy. And I messed with multiple color layers and stuff, and so, like, mistakes popped more. Whereas on the pauldron, I kept it pretty clean on the color balance there. And then there wasn't a skin tone in that palette I could use besides the gold, and that would have been a little off. So I could have probably done a super faint one, but I didn't bother with that. So yeah, looks kind of melodramatic. It's not painterly, but it's interesting. I was pretty happy with how those turned out for thumbnails. Guess we'll probably have the full thing once we get the hair and back of the helm for this screenshot. But yeah, so I can put those away for now. Where was the last one? In the helm. Is it? Oh, it's in the face neck. Got it. Ooh. Let's see. I'm just gonna call that, and I'm gonna make it a less obnoxious color. I'm gonna make the whole layer gray, so it's not a distraction down here. Okay. Now's the part where we have some fun with the fill. We see if it's going to cooperate with us, which I already can tell you it won't because we got a lot of open stuff around the edges. I'm going to take these two and pop them in their own layer. Is basically a doodles equivalent for this, because I'd like to actually do this part, right. This we're using raster because we're trying to use fills, and we talked about that earlier. Why we're doing that, not vector. We're going to break out the fill tool. And I'm going to double check which settings I have it on. It's going to be uncooperative with us for a while. The other thing that I want to do is I want to put this below the fine detail outline, since we're using that as inks. Normally I'd put it below the inks. Just double check. How does this look up close? Pretty shoddy. Okay. I want to adjust a few things. We got good close gap. That's good. That will help if there's like little openings and stuff. Like in here, it'll know to ignore some of that. There's limits, but it can help. Multiple layers, good, so it won't just refer to the one. Max opacity. And we've got fill up to vector path on. That is good, I think. Because otherwise you get the weird like little fuzz around the edge. You've seen this on like PNGs and stuff. Where like you've got, because the line itself isn't one color, it's actually a bunch of tones, especially when we're using pencil and not inks. So it's got these little like half and quarter and like subsection tones in there. If you fill like this, those actually it's kind of okay on this one because we've got nice dark lines, but it can be really bad. Versus this one, it's going to be a little more thorough, although you can keep clicking and it'll keep expanding it. But also it'll be a little more thorough and get under those. And more importantly, and this will be the easiest place to show the difference, we just do like 2 of these. Here's going to be 2 without fill up to vector path. If we hide the lines, we got all these gaps in here. Sometimes you want that. Sometimes that's a really cool effect. But sometimes you don't, and it's really bad. So if we fill up to vector path, it instead goes way up the actual path of the vector line. And so when we hide this, it just, like, once again, it's one of those benefits of knowing where the line itself is. Mega Eraser, just going to put all that away. Then I'm probably going to take the Mega Eraser and not be actually using it for Mega. Oops. Oh, that's neat. I didn't know you could do that. Woo! Okay. This is where it's going to get to be a challenge and something that I'd need to prep for a little bit. Because like these may be flats, but we're probably still going to have to put a little more thought, because there's some really bold highlights going on in here that we're going to want to capture. More importantly, this isn't actually flats per se. What I'm trying to capture on this one is relative values. So we're trying to make a grayscale, basically. And then CSP actually has tools for converting from a grayscale into color, assuming you've got the values, reasonably within control. But this also helps us keep our tones and everything a little more balanced. Basically, there is more logic to it, but for me and in my mind, what we're benefiting from this is because, look, A, I have a penchant for bold colors, and they're too bold. You don't want that. You've seen that. But B, more importantly, is when you're dealing with colors, you're having to deal with like a lot of different things relative to each other, figuring out that they work well next to each other, figuring out how light and dark they need to be, all sorts of things. And figuring out light and dark of colors, quote unquote, is kind of stinking hard. Because it doesn't always match nicely with like hue, saturation, and value the way you'd think it would. Like a really dark pink may not actually be what you expect compared to a dark red, compared to a dark blue. The saturations can be a little wonky with colors. And so grayscale means you don't have to worry about that. You can focus on getting the actual shading part right. And I don't mean like shadows, I mean like the actual relative shades of everything. And then you can go back and be like, okay, this needs to be red, but we also need it to make sure that we're at this this saturation. We need to make sure that the gold is at that saturation in this part, and so on. I'm going to try to get some flat colors in here with relative saturations, and the odds are it's not going to be great. because I don't entirely know what I'm doing with that stuff yet. And especially because these have a lot of funky gradients and reflections and stuff. Part of what that means is I'm probably going to leave the bottom 5 for gold, like the lightest ones. Okay, obviously we've got like the really bold white highlight here. Maybe that ought to be, but got a golden light on it. Maybe we can get away with it. Basically, what I want to figure out what would make my life easier, but which I'm not sure I'll be able to do, is to find which thing in here is the center tone, or really think about the whole distribution of tones in here, because there's some pretty deep shadows. Like I'm confident in making not all that, but okay. I'm gonna do a little cheatsy here. Not a cheatsy, but a little cheatsy. Whoa, how did I get? Oh, I hate these things. Hold on 1 second. They're kind of a pain to get rid of is all. You don't know how to do it. I kept getting them stuck on my canvases for a long time. Okay, but as cool of an effect as that is, and as much as I've realized that which layer is this line on? On red cloak? One of them is. And left over from like a placeholder shadow. Right, well, let's clear those out. Glad we found those. You could get some cool effects, if, like animating a box like that. Okay, but actually what I want to do is just make it line only. And also just erase this. I guess we want Mega Eraser one more time. Although clearly that box was an entity of some sort, so I probably could have just deleted it, but like, eh. More importantly, I'm going to go for my 6/8, 6/8, 6/8. Yep, for this. Rectangle. Adjust it to be where it needs to be. I guess that one was off screen. I was erasing. And I've gone and erased part of the box. There we go. Anyway, this will just keep our fills a little more in check. Not a permanent piece of it. I'm not planning on it. You could probably do a nice little like Art Deco-y thing around the edge or something. Or Art Nouveau. Might fit better. It depends on what you want. I ain't much of an Art Nouveau guy myself. But it certainly has its use. Yeah, I guess step one, I can figure out what are the darkest shadows in this picture. And the answer to me seems obvious to be 2. Here and here. So that's what I'm going to start with. I have this got up to vector path, right? Yeah. Okay. Those are the darkest. Maybe also to an extent down here. Oops. I'll have to clear some of that out. Yeah, this is where you can only get so much close gap. There's still limits. Problem is when I try to fill this shape, it might attempt to fill the whole thing. Hopefully not, no. Hopefully it'll parse that as an edge. We can test. Oh, it parses it real messy. Okay, that's fine. Again, we'll have a lot of cleanup on this stuff. I'm just trying to throw some basic stuff down. And we can go like 2 lighter for some of this stuff down here. I want it to be tangibly lighter. Some of the stuff under the fluff. Not quite as intense, but it's still fairly intense. This one. into the zone of like the reds, I think we could have. I think the reds are actually darker. I think like our core color for the red ought to be this. Hang on some of that. Oh, actually, I suppose considerably darker than the reds are still there. Not that one. This part. This. Back on our reds tone. Ah, there's another one. Where do these keep coming from? Or did I delete it and then undo the delete by mistake? Okay. I'm kind of treating this like flats for shadows, which I shouldn't. The shadow gradients are going to be more complicated, or important and complicated. Okay, belt is same tone, truthfully. Buckles are obviously much lighter, but the belt itself is not. This one might even be a hair darker. Now most of that's just belt overlap in the original, which we didn't quite align the same, so meh. Don't want this to be the same as the red. This ought to be darker than the red. But yeah, see, a lot of this is just about figuring out relative tones. Or shades. Or whatever. I think a lot of the gold is going to be in this much lighter category, but actually I think the gold is honestly going to be the lightest. I don't know for sure where that's going to land, and that's a lot of texture variance on it, and there's a lot of reflection variance, especially on the front one. There is less here. These loops are notably a little darker. As are some of these upper ones. And it kind of lightens up as we get to this front bit. That kind of darkens again down here, but not all that. This is, I don't know, again, it's got darker patches, but the base color is basically the same as the other stuff in here. Worried about the level of contrast here. Okay. In the same world, especially as the upper lighter parts, like there's going to be shade on it, but got some that are, just a little bit darker. Stuff down here, the stuff in there, even this piece itself. Actually, that one's the same as the darker gold, truthfully. So yeah, it's a little different. And this is, super messy. This is not cleaned up. This isn't even going to be precise end. I'm just trying to get this close. This is basically our rough first pass on day one because I didn't have time to think this through. So. Skin tone's complicated. Whoops. Alright, that's opacity, not scale. To me, it's interesting. The fur doesn't really look to be a lighter shade than the fabric adjacent to it. And I think that's intentional. Oops. That'd be on the fill tool, shouldn't I? Think because they're not really looking to make that particular difference pop. Now, obviously, the top part considerably lighter over here. And like the edge that's in the light, much lighter. The edge that's underneath, much darker. But it's not necessarily as much. But they're trying to make this just sort of read as one block. Even this is like downplayed. Like the amount of contrast we're getting here is more than we're getting there. So I probably ought to darken this whole section up by one tier. What is that? That's this one. So let's try darkening the whole mess by one. And then these ones as well go from what well, they'll go to this. That'll hopefully, because this pops more like this, but this really needs to blend more with the lower section. We may even darken it one more, if be told. We'll see. Get that a little more filled in. Once again, for the helm, we've got light, and then for the top, we've got really light. This may be too light, truthfully, for most of it. I mean to get our nose with that, but that's fine. This lower part is going to be a couple shades darker, truthfully. I think that's what we're looking for. Compared to this top part's got a lot of light and reflection on it, and it's a lighter bit of metal. And then the knots themselves are even lighter. Just like a shade, just a tiny little bit though. Interesting how much this is a gradient of blue grays. I really ought to make a gradient of like slightly more browny gold grays, see if that gets us some interesting differences. And then these are, I'd rank them roughly similar with the lower cloak. So we're dealing with whatever tier this is. Most of these interior ones, they've got pretty high contrast. This feels like it's a little too much contrast, truth be told. Yeah, this is definitely a whip stage. Don't y'all be panicking. And then sort of same deal with the darker bits up here, which are of course slightly too big in this drawing, so I may have to lighten them so they don't overly draw attention. Worth note that while this is very light, the rim on this very edge down here is less so. Got a nice bit of contrast. The wings are really more in line with the lower helm than the upper one, except for the one edge. And I like this being able to just drag the fill brush around. That's really nice. And it's going to be more like the nice reflective glow going on up here. I noticed that one in particular is kind of picked out by that. This one, this one kind of has the same bold lightness going into it, makes it highlight a little more. Oops, did not mean to turn the world that tone. And these knots are a brighter even than the other stuff around them. I may have to make that a shade less dark. That's like what? This one? Let's just loosen them up a little bit. I don't want them to be overbearing. We may even up them one more. We'll see. But for now, I'll leave it at this. Truthfully, while this is a different color, I think it has got the same shade deal going. What's notable about this piece is that it's got this one that's actually like, that's what, this, right? Yeah. It should actually be a hair darker, and then the other two, because they're catching a little more light, are a hair lighter, and that's what's kind of gives that a weird dynamic. This one, it's the neutral tone still. Got our inner helm black, which may be too much contrast, but I don't think it is. Gold. Yeah, okay, it's not. We've got this one, which is going to be just like a hair lighter because it's getting better light. Then we get into interesting mechanics of all this. There's some in here that need to be like a darker shade of this, basically, because that's what we're seeing. But like, okay, no, that one's still hyper dark below it. And there's some in there where we're getting like golden light of the background through, like they're gonna actually be pretty bright. Whoops, not that. This one's got like a darker below it. And okay. Like that. But can I just fill within the bounds of one? Yeah, except the opposite of that. Oh, right, okay, so I'd have to... Nope, not the whole thing. Cancel. Okay, I know what I need to do. Lasso only the stuff that I actually want to have. Kind of the light gray in. And we're going to fill them with that light gray. Only up to that degree. Then the other stuff, going to make that darker tone. These are color. Cool, yeah. Yeah, that one's an interesting one because it's technically got, and we'll have a lot more of that, especially once we start doing the gradients properly. Technically got like 2 tones in one section of line, but that's okay. See, what I ought to do is convert this to grayscale afterwards and see if this is even remotely close. Honestly, I think there's probably too much light in the light ones, just like a hair. And you may have to bring the gold down a notch, but I also like the contrast quite a bit. Oh, red. Heckin'. Red is thinking the hardest one for me to eyeball. I can't get it. I'd say the early parts of this, I'm just doing this one with a pen, honestly, are going to be the same as the cloak. They sort of blend into the back and blend into part of the neck. So, especially this section here, and then these up to a point like here. We'll sort of do that. Then they lighten up a whole lot. Like there's a little patch that's actually brighter even than the gold for most of it. Whoops, it's not that patch though. Like down here and like a little bit of that. And everything else is just somewhere in between. It's kind of... It's like the front of the helm, not quite as bold, but like in that zone. Maybe like this one. Yeah, see, the hair is going to be its own mess. In a lot of ways. Oh yeah, that should still be dark. The full dark of this. Okay. Then this is actually going to also include this part, and not so much all of that, but that's fine. Skin tone, skin tone, skin tone, skin tone. It's... Well, it's just right in between everything else. Let's see where this lands us. I think a hair lighter. It blends into the helm a lot, and I feel like there's a little more contrast. But then, I guess maybe we leave it at that. And obviously, the lighting and stuff and shadows, there's a lot more going on with this than what it initially looks like. And there'll be light reflections there too. But this is sort of, like, this is what I'm basically trying to do. That one's, like, almost as dark as the other stuff around it. It really ought to be here even, truthfully. Like, I know it's a shade lighter, but it's, like, barely. And that's skin tone too. It's just a different section in shadow. But, like, yeah, so this is just a super rough outline. I'm going to do, obviously, a little more reading up on this, because this isn't something I've done from this approach ever, and in general in a long time. But I do think that this, like, we're getting the right shape blocks in here. What it's telling me is I feel It feels like this ought to be darker, just so it blends in more with the rest of this, but also, like, it is similar to a lot of the neck tones in shadow. I'm gonna make it one tier more. So let's see, where are we at with that? Okay, so we're gonna just make it like this. We'll see if this pops too much or not. Alright, I said darker, didn't I? We're actually bringing it down here. That feels more right. That way we've mostly got, and I'm gonna do the same with this one. Like it is the gold. It's even got the lightness of the gold, but like it's not quite as prominent because of the shadows and such. Just one tier down. So that way those all mix better. Like we've got the clear blocks of where the focus is. You've got the brighter, bold accents. And these are the same focuses we've been talking about for a while. The helm and the pauldron obviously are draws. The face to an extent, the hair to an extent are the major character traits. They're where you want your eyes. It's also where the direction of motion is. All of this is basically background. Like it's above just the plain, almost gradient looking sky and this particular section of this clip, but it still falls firmly into that category of it's not the focal point. And so you've got different materials that are very similar in tone, and you've got darker ones where it serves to, because it's a gentle gradient from these midtones to the dark, as opposed to a fairly bold contrast to the light ones, like, and at least it should be. I'm not sure I've nailed it with these colors, but, or these tones. But the gentle gradient means that this all just like gently blurs out of the way. Like no one's going to notice this brown fold on their first observation if they're just like checking out this character. They're like, yo, check out the cool helmet. It's also where the details concentrated. You know, there's a lot of stuff that's doing it. It's a well-designed character and well done shot for this trailer too. Malenia is a super cool looking person. Tarnished? Not tarnished. Empyrean? Yeah. Anyway, more of a title than anything, though. Regardless, Malenia looks very cool. And so hopefully we'll be able to actually capture that as we're doing it. This is probably where my drawing is going to differ the most from the original. And again, like, this is... I'm clearly just... As much as it's going to be a finished, cool drawing, it's also very clearly matching the style of the original pretty heavily right now. So it's as much a useful study as anything. This is part of like it's so much harder to come up with poses and all of this stuff and alignment and angles and all of that. And also then go through all these phases. It's what I'd like to do, but it's going to take a lot more practice. Still, I'm quite excited with the direction this is going. Especially because, once again, the fact that it's looking this close and it's still, like, I realize this is a 2D image, but it's still a 3D character. It's not like that's just a drawing someone did. So I'm excited that I'm able to capture that. There's worth in that alone. But yeah, in any case, I'm quite happy with how this is going. And there's a lot of options we have to do interesting stuff with it, too. Different shading, different line work, all sorts of things. But it's getting late, and I don't want to lose enthusiasm too much, as I worry that if this finishes, I'm going to do a quote-unquote good enough job of capturing the likeness that it'll just look like I put a filter over the picture, which would be stinking disappointing. But that's not an issue for today, and if any case, this will still be awesome. So we'll leave it at that for now, and yeah, I hope you'll join me next time. We'll do more of this. We're looking at, well, okay, most likely Thursday. I have a doctor's appointment in the afternoon, but if it runs long enough to interfere with this, then something's gone right askew. I'm not expecting that. So yeah, we will pick back up on this. Pardon me. We'll pick back up on this in next time on Thursday. Same time, same channel as always, so I hope to see y'all there. Morning, afternoon, evening, night, whatever time it is for you, I hope y'all have a good one. And Yeah, honestly, any time of day, get some sleep. We're on the internet. We pretty much all could use it. Have a good one, and see y'all hopefully next time.